occupation.
Right.
But, we were under British supervision. That time was still, a lot of them, the higher, officers were from Britain because they, this was the UNRWA. And the UNRWA had representatives from every country. So it was mainly British and American.
But who ran the camp? The Jewish people ran the camp?
Only Jewish people.
So were there a lot of soldiers in the camp? Or
Pardon me?
Was it primarily Jews in the camp, or were there a lot of soldiers in the camp?
You know what? I don't remember too much from reading book. I tell you why. Because when I came, the reading book Kaserne was already occupied with a lot of survivors. And whatever we were assigned, we used to get like a little cubicle. And it was divided with sheets because must have been a big place where the soldiers stayed. And then to make them separate because they were families among us too. Mm-hmm. So they gave us little cubicles. That's how the food we were provided, we used to go, they had a canteen and they used to have a kitchen there. And the soup and the provision, the rations that we used to get, we used to go for it every day. I have pictures how I carried the pots to our room.
So you ate in your room?
I ate in my room, in our room, yes.
Tell me.
Maybe, no, I guess it must have been in the room where we were staying.
So tell me about the social life there.
The social life. How could I describe you our social life? In reading book Kaserne was a very short time. So I don't think that was such a social life. And I didn't...
How long were you there for?
I wasn't there 20. I was 17, 18.
No, but how long were you there?
Oh, how long I was there. I really couldn't tell. It must have been a short time because people kept on coming in and they didn't have the room. So they started to give us locations. So the first location after Riedenburg was, I think it was called the Siedlung. The first picture from Hanka that there is a house, this was Siedlung. This must have been also like a development, either for the women from the soldiers, and they lived there. So they emptied some of these buildings, and this was like one flight, It wasn't very high buildings. It was like they built the private homes, little houses, and whoever fits in, they gave everyone a room. Every family had a room. If it was two people, and if it were single girls, they put with other single girls. But this was already our better place.
Was it in the same area?
Pardon me?
Was it in the same area?
This was also in Salzburg, but this was in the outskirts of Salzburg.
So the first Salzburg was...
Riedenburg was in town, I believe, in Salzburg.
Right, and the
other... I really couldn't remember the location, because I wasn't familiar with Salzburg. Afterwards
I believe the first Salzburg was in the town, and the second Salzburg was out of town.
Parsch was the second. No, but Parsch was the last one.
Right.
But it must have been in the same vicinity.
Now, in the first Salzburg,
yes.
Let's call it the first Salzburg.
Yes.
Did you go to the opera house?
Of course.
Did you go with others?
With Aunt Kalou. We were, I always, because I was single, she was already connected with her husband. She wasn't married yet, but they lived together. And I met her through my sister-in-law, because they were in the same camp. They were both from Lodz. So I became friends with Hanka, and my sister-in-law was with my brother, but I became we became like a family. And I liked handkan. And then we took private lessons from
In-
German, we learned English. So I learned 2 languages, I didn't know German.
Where was in town or in?
This was private by private teacher.
Right.
I only had a private teacher. And so I used to take lessons together with Hanka. My sister-in-law took lessons with another friend who was also a neighbor. She was from Vilna, I think. So we had
Do you
to
remember that person's name?
who?
The other friend.
Yeah, Zina Shapiro.
Okay.
Zin, she was a very heavy-set girl. She was a brilliant girl, but she was heavy, and she was from divorced parents. Her father left before the war. He went to Canada, and her mother didn't want to leave Poland. She was an only child, so she stayed in Vilna until the Germans came,
Yeah.
and she got stuck. After the war, I don't know how she came, because she came from the Russian part of Poland. She was very bright. She was a pianist, and I have pictures of her. They are not so great, but she's there. But she was extremely bright and intelligent. Don't forget, in Russia, in Vilna, the war took longer until the war broke out there. So they had still the education. So anyway, we all became very friendly, but I felt good with Hanka. And my sister-in-law, I lived together, but this was already, I had a sick sister too. My sister took very sick in Salzburg. She couldn't, she was the first one to get penicillin to help her. She had endocarditis. I don't know if you're familiar. This is like the last thing of the rheumatic heart. And I used to scream at the doctors. I said, I helped her to Auschwitz, and she made it, and you are the doctors with medication, and you cannot help it. So he used to tell me, it's like a horse, he's going up to a mountain and he's stuck in the middle and he cannot go any further or return. And her sickness was advanced already. She died in 1946.
Oh.
But we were already in not the Riedenburg, but in Siedlung. And so this started my tragedy after the war. But she was buried in Salzburg, and she wasn't even 16 yet.
I'm so sorry.
So anyway, after I was already in the States in 1951, my brother, we arranged, Benzi and my brother was still in Salzburg because he waited to go to Israel. So the one from Israel came to Salzburg, and we got her the permission to take her body out, and she's buried in Israel now.
I'm glad.
So this was mine. So like my tragedy continued, my problems. But in Siedlung, then I tried to go. I don't know if your mother told you. I married my husband with a child. Did she tell you that?
No.
This was a secret for the longest time because I was going out with my husband. The minute I came to Salzburg, I was a popular girl. I guess I wasn't bad looking either. But when my sister took sick, I couldn't be bothered. And there was a girl that she was crazy for him. So he married her, and she died by the birth of the child. That beautiful boy that you saw in the picture.
Oh, okay.
So he was born in 46. So till 46, my mind wasn't, she died in 46. and his wife died in 46.
Your
She
sister
died
died.
6 months later after my sister.
Oh, okay.
Both of them were redheads. My sister, she was a redhead. And they were buried right next to each other. And when my brother and I married, maybe 47, I don't remember. And when my brother came to Salzburg, he didn't only take my sister age, but her body too. And they are buried together in Haifa, one grave next to the other. But it took, I raised him, he was a year old. And then I had a child here. But she never knew that he's not her brother.
So you adopted him?
What?
You adopted him?
The name he carried.
Right.
I didn't have to adopt him, but I was his mother. He
Gotcha.
knew me. You understand?
I understand.
And we married in 47 or 48. So he was more than a year, a little older than a year.
Now, I'm going to take, I want to ask you some, you can continue, but I want to take you back a little bit. I don't want to stop you, but I want to ask you other questions. Is that all right?
What?
I don't want to stop you, but I want to ask you other questions.
Yeah, but I don't want this to be in the movie.
I'll take it out.
Would you take it
Absolutely.
out, please?
Absolutely.
Because nobody has to know it.
No problem. Let's go back to the question I was asking you about the Opera House. In Salzburg 1.
In Riedenburg, I didn't go to the opera yet.
But Riedenburg, the first camp was in the town and is where the Opera House was.
Yes.
So you didn't go to the Opera House when you were
I
in
didn't even know the town well
Okay.
to know where to
Okay.
go. You understand?
Okay.
I was short in that camp, in that DP camp in Regensburg. It didn't last too long.
Okay.
We were not even a year there.
When did you first meet? What I'm interested in asking you about is the social elements and when you start to meet
Where in
your
Salzburg?
husband in Salzburg, your soon-to-be husband. We're talking about the end of 45, beginning of 46, so we're going to go back a little bit. When did you go to the movie? When you started to meet Hanke, when you started to go to the movies?
I started going actually to the opera after my sister died, because before I was busy, I was constantly in the hospital with
So you didn't start really socializing till 46?
I would say late 46 or 47.
Okay.
It's a matter of fact that the first, because I was working already, I think in the UNRWA, and I was making some money. So the first money I made, I went to see Yehuda Menuchim, the violin player in Salzburg. And this was on the festivals, the Festspiele.
Now, this was before your sister died or after?
After my sister died.
So, is it safe to say that...
It must have been either late 46
Right.
or beginning 47.
So until your sister died, you were pretty much
You have
involved...
to speak a little louder.
Before your sister died, you were
Yeah.
involved primarily with taking care of your sister.
Absolutely. I explain you something. She was most of the time in the hospital because she was in and out.
Right.
And we were three, my brother, my sister-in-law, and me. So I used to change off with my sister. One night my sister-in-law stayed in the hospital with
Okay.
her. One night I stayed. And this is how we lived. We lived only, we had to take care of her.
I understand. So you didn't really meet other people until after her death?
I knew the people because the camp wasn't that big, not
Yeah,
to know everybody. But I didn't socialize with anyone.
Right. Okay. So after she died, you developed a larger social circle. You knew them, but you didn't really...
Well,
Yes.
before she really took very sick, I still met people they used to make like dancing once a week. So we used to go and socialize, we used to dance, They brought a band, 2 people were playing, and we were entertained. And I met a lot, I guess I was popular. They liked me, and there was a boy that he liked me, liked him too. And this was the end of 45, must have been the end of 45. And he went illegal to Israel. And I was always under the thing that he must have been killed in the 48 war.
Yeah. You never found out what happened to him?
I found out later. And he liked me very much. And he sent a boy from Italy. He was already in Italy, Milan. So he sent a fellow that he stayed with him. He had to get the room in Salzburg. So he said he should find me and tell me that he's waiting for me, I should come. But my sister was still alive and sick. And if I don't like him, he will deliver me to my brother in Israel. He was very nice. And I really liked him. And in all these years, I always said to myself, he was from Warsaw, if that Lolle Koppelman is alive. And by coincidence, a few years ago, I was in Israel. I go to Israel very often. And now that my kids live there, I go a few times a year. I am at my sister-in-law's house. And I said, fella, I heard that Lolle Koppelman, somebody by mistake, I was in Macy's. And my son was in New York, and he went shopping, and my feet were killing me. So I went to the coffee shop in Macy's. I said, you go shop. And if you want me, so I'm sitting here having a coffee. And all of a sudden, next to me is an Israeli girl, with another friend of mine. Do you know Roman Kent?
I know the name.
Yeah, he's involved with the Ukraine conference. So I said, Hannah, did I hear that you mentioned Lolle Koppelman? Is this the one who's from Warsaw? She says, yes. So she said to me, you know him? She said, yes, oh, of course I know him. Goes back a long way. I know him from 45. But where does he live? She says in Savion, in Tel Aviv. Savion is one of these fancy areas. So, and that was it. So, but I was happy to hear that he's alive and he's married. I am in Israel, and I said to my sister-in-law, fella, Lolle, you remember Lolle Koppelman? She says, yes, he's the guy that used to come to go out with you, I said, yes. I heard that he lives in Savion. Could you find his name? I cannot read Hebrew. Maybe you will find him. Sure enough, we found him. And I called him, and she called him up. She calls him up and she says to him, are you Lolle Koppelman? He says, yes. Were you in Salzburg? He says, yes. So he says, do you remember a name, Esther Himmelfarb? He says, of course I remember. She said, she wants to talk to you. Goes to the phone. And I talked to him. I said, in all these years, I always wondered if you are still around, because I worried that you went before the war, and there was a big war, Independence War.
Yeah.
But I'm really happy that you are alive. So he said, oh, you're so young. I said, I'm not young. And I would love to talk to you, but my wife is sitting right next to me. So I said, it's just enough that I know that you are alive. So isn't it a small...
That's great. That's great.
This was my first love.
That's great.
And I have a lot of boys that used to like me. But
so did you ever talk to him again?
I wasn't interested in meeting him or whatever. But I was curious to see if he's alive.
That's great. What a great story.
Isn't it a coincidence? Then I was going out with my husband.
Then
but
this-
it was the same thing.
How did you meet him?
How did I? Also in camp, he was running after me. And I met him, and his friend was Samek Banach, but you didn't know him.
I know the name.
You probably know, he was Levenstein's nephew.
Okay.
And he's the one who taught them, because he lived in Ohio, in Kenton, Ohio, and he came to New Jersey. And of course, Levenstein was his uncle, and he had a mother too. But his mother died, and he married. But Samek was a good friend of my husband, and Samek liked my sister. And so actually through him I got to know Joe. And we were going out and he liked me a lot. And the same thing was when I heard that there's a girl that she loves him, and she's crazy. So I said, I have my problems, let him. So I told that boy to tell him that I'm not interested. But after his wife died, we had a neighbor in Siedlung, that this was already to our age, they were old, they had 2 kids already. They were saved, they were hidden. And he used to do business with my husband. My husband was one of the biggest businessmen in Salzburg. So he comes, and then I was going out with a boy who went to England to study. We used to write to each other. So I used to have piles of letters from him. And
This
one
is before your husband.
This was after she died, and he was single already, with a child, and he had a nurse, and he was the firstborn child in Salzburg. So what happened, so he comes in one day, he talks to my brother, and he said, listen, Ben Zion, there is a fellow here who likes your sister, and I would like to get them together. And when he said this to him, so I knew right away whom he's talking. And every time I wanted to see that child, because it was so, it was like a toy. I used to go to a friend, and the balconies used to be near each other, and he used to sit in a high chair to play with him from a distance. So I knew about whom he's talking, and I didn't want to hear. So he said, you with your love business, that he's in England, for what do you need it? I am leaving for the States, and I want you to get engaged to this guy before I leave. But I didn't have to know him, because I knew him, I was going out with him. So that's how we got together. And then I had another guy, when I went illegal to Israel, going to Israel, I got stuck in Innsbruck. And there was a guy that I always had a crush on. He was from our area. So I didn't want to come back from Innsbruck, because I couldn't go through the mountains. So I stayed in Innsbruck, and my brother kept on alarming with my sister-in-law, you have to come back. So I said, I lost all my clothes, went to Israel, and I'm not coming back. I didn't mean the clothes, but I wanted to be there. So anyway, so we used to romance a little bit, but finally he made me come back, and I came back. And shortly after, I was the first one to be engaged in Salzburg. I had an engagement party, and he gave me an engagement ring.
Is that unusual?
A nice diamond. And the next day, and I was working already in the UNRWA. I was independent. So I come to the end, the guy who was my boss, he was a Czechoslovakian Jew. But I think he was married to a Gentile woman. He married her probably, she was in the army, he was in the army, and he liked me. Everything he was to buy or to do things, without me he wouldn't move. So, and if I needed something, my husband wanted to buy me. So he used to go to Switzerland, he bought me the first watch in Switzerland, he bought me fabric for my wedding dress. He was very nice to me, but when I got engaged, I never told him that I'm going to get married. So somebody comes into our office and he congratulates me. So he said to me, why do they congratulate you? So he said, his name was Belfer, he said, oh, don't you know, she got engaged yesterday. When he heard, and he didn't like my brother-in-law. I had two brother-in-laws in the camp too. Joe had two brothers, but one left for Germany, he lived in Laufen, and the two brothers lived in Salzburg. So he thought that I got engaged to the one that he didn't like. So I said, Mr. Porges, it's not Pinkas, it's Joe that I am marrying. But he was angry that I didn't tell him. But anyway, it calmed down, and the same day, the day after my engagement, whom do I see? The guy from Innsbruck. He came into Salzburg.
Was he mad?
So he said, oh, I heard that you got engaged. What was the rush? And he was a very good-looking guy. So I said, you know what, Manus? I didn't want to get married to a guy that looks like a doll, that thinks only of himself. And I'm marrying a very nice guy. He says, yes, I heard he's very rich. So I said, who told you that? He's not rich. He's like we are. And that was it. So this was the end with him. And then I met him in Israel. Whenever I went to Israel, I used to call him. We used to get together. And this was my romance. And the kid was a year old. Jackie was a year old when I married him, and we had a family.
Now, let's talk about friends. Who were your closest friends in Salzburg?
Hanka.
Hanka Lou. Who else?
I was close with my sister-in-law. We lived together.
And what's her name?
And Fella. Her maiden name was Grützmacher. Fella Grützmacher. And that was it.
Who else did you know from Salzburg?
I met people like Herta, Sapka. You know these people, right?
Yes, of course.
Then who else was the...
Who did you know from...
What?
Who did
Rosa Kluge.
Who did you know from Salzburg that you ended up knowing in America?
The same people.
Same
I know
people.
them, the same people, yes. We were very close, and we were in touch constantly. Sapja, I arranged an apartment. She lived on the same street where I lived, in the Bronx.
Okay.
And then Herta came from, she was someplace...
Minneapolis.
And Roja used to come, and we used to sleep on the floors, because our apartments were not... I had a big apartment, a nice brand new building, but, you know, we didn't play, we didn't have beds. We used to cook, and we used to eat, and we used to have fun.
Now we'll go back to Salzburg. What was the feeling in Salzburg, not in the beginning when life was rough, but when you were, what was your wedding like? What was your wedding like?
My wedding was in Germany.
Oh, okay.
I had to cross the border because I went illegal to Germany to get married. At my wedding, I had only my sister-in-law and my other sister-in-law who married. She got engaged after I got married. And who else was at the wedding? That was it.
And what made you get married in Germany?
Because my brother-in-law moved to Germany.
Okay.
And he was the older one, so he arranged the wedding.
Okay.
We took that rabbi, I don't know if he was a rabbi, but he practiced as a rabbi. He married us off,